Today we're going to look at the causes of the Civil War. The root causes of the Civil War can be traced all the way back to the founding of the 13 colonies. Because of its warm climate, the Southern Colonies, eventually the Southern States, became dependent on agriculture and slavery. And here you see the Southern Colonies. But the economy of the New England Colonies, eventually the Northern States, became industrial. This was due to its cold climate. And here you see the New England Colonies. So when you look at this map, African Americans in the 13 colonies, you'll notice as the years go up, the number of slaves in the colonies goes up, especially by 1780. And remember, the majority of these slaves were found in the Southern colonies. Regional differences were even an issue in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. When Jefferson included a passage attacking slavery in his draft, it caused a great debate. It was eventually removed. Jefferson later blamed the removal of the passage on delegates from South Carolina and Georgia and northern delegates who represented merchants who were at the time actively involved in the transatlantic slave trade. At the 1787 Constitutional Convention, the Three-Fifths Compromise was a compromise between southern and northern states that helped ensure ratification of the Constitution. Every 5 slaves would count for 3 people for taxation and representation purposes. This led to increased sectionalism. So every 5 slaves would be equal to 3 people. In 1793, Eli Whitney's cotton gin revolutionized the cotton industry in the United States. Removal of cotton seeds became 50 times faster. This led to greater demand for slaves in the Deep South. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the United States doubled in size. Manifest Destiny spurred westward expansion and the fight over slavery. This gave the United States control of the vast lands west of the Mississippi. As Americans pushed west, the issue of slavery came to the forefront. Would the new U.S. territories allow slavery or be free? So the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States and caused the debate over whether or not slavery was going to be allowed in these new territories. In 1820, the first confrontation over slavery in the West took place. Missouri applied for admission as a slave state. This would have upset the balance of power in the Senate in favor of slave states. Henry Clay suggested that Missouri enter as a slave state and Maine as a free state to keep the balance of power. This showed how explosive the issue of slavery was. Here's a map showing the Missouri Compromise. Missouri comes in as a slave state. Maine comes in as a free state. Everything above Missouri's southern border did not allow slavery, and anything below Missouri's southern border allowed slavery. During Andrew Jackson's administration, South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, nullified the protective tariffs of 1828 and 1832 and threatened to secede, which means leave, if the federal government attempted to collect those tariffs. Jackson believed that this was equal to treason and threatened to use troops to enforce the law. The crisis was avoided with a new tariff acceptable to South Carolina, but it was the first act of defiance in the South threatening secession, which means leaving, over policies in the North. The Southern states felt that protective tariffs hurt their economy and at the same time making Northern manufacturers rich. Now let's look at this political cartoon, and it shows the way Southerners felt about the tariff of 1828 and the tariff of 1832. On the left side of the paper you see the agriculture, which is of course of the South, and you'll notice that they're pretty much look like guys who have no money. Their ships are broken down here in the harbor, and you compare that to the rich manufacturers, which have very nice clothes on and their manufacturing building is almost brand new. In 1845, Texas was annexed by the United States, causing a war with Mexico. The American victory in the U.S.-Mexican War added over 500,000 acres of land to the United States. Now, this addition is known as the Mexican Cession, and if you look at this part here on the map, you see all the territory that the United States gained after their victory in the U.S.-Mexican War. In 1849, gold was discovered in California, causing thousands of people to move to the area in search of riches. California grew so quickly it was able to apply for statehood almost overnight. In the Compromise of 1850, California entered as a free state, and the rest of the Mexican Cession was divided into New Mexico and Utah. Voters would decide through popular sovereignty on the issue of slavery. This intensified the battle over slavery in new territories by making the decision the responsibility of the state's citizens. Now, if you remember popular sovereignty, it's a constitutional principle in which the people hold the power in the government and they exercise it through voting. Let's look at this map of the Mexican War and the Compromise of 1850. When Texas was annexed by the United States, it caused a war with Mexico. The United States wins, and Mexico cedes all this territory to the United States. After gold being discovered in California in 1849, California grows so quickly, they're able to apply for statehood almost overnight, and they join as a free state. The rest of this territory that you see here is allowed to vote on the issue of slavery using popular sovereignty. Look at the rest of this here. This is the dividing line between the slave states and the non-slave states. The Fugitive Slave Law was part of the Compromise of 1850. The law was very controversial. It required that all citizens, Northern and Southern, were obligated to return runaway slaves. People who helped slaves escape would be jailed and fined. The law enraged Northerners because it made them feel a part of the slave system. Persons involved with the Underground Railroad worked to undermine the power and authority of this law. In 1852, Harry Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Stowe wrote of the evils and cruelty of slavery. The novel had an enormous influence in the North. It helped change the way many Northerners felt about slavery. It caused many Northerners to join abolitionist groups. If you remember, an abolitionist is someone who wants to do away with slavery. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act divided the territory of Nebraska into two territories, Kansas and Nebraska. The settlers of the new territories would use popular sovereignty to decide on slavery. So all this brown area right here was originally Nebraska, and under the Kansas-Nebraska Act, they divided it into the territories of Nebraska and Kansas. Southerners supported the act, while Northerners felt it was a betrayal. Thousands of pro- and anti-slavery supporters flooded Kansas to vote and fight for their position on slavery. Civil war was about to erupt. By 1855, the act set off bitter violence in Kansas. Over 200 people died over the issue of slavery. The area became known as Bleeding Kansas. The town of Lawrence was destroyed by pro-slavery forces. This left little room for compromise. Both sides were willing to fight for their beliefs. Now, if you look at these two illustrations, the one on the right is the burning of Lawrence, Kansas, and then the one on the left shows you the destruction and what Lawrence, Kansas looked like after the burning of the town. In the 1850s, Dred Scott was a slave who claimed that because his master had taken him to the free territories of Illinois and Wisconsin, he should be free. The Supreme Court ruled that because Scott was not considered a citizen but property, he could not file a lawsuit. In the 1857 decision, the court also ruled that Congress had no power to decide the issue of slavery in the territories. This meant that slavery was legal in all the territories and the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. Slavery became a moral issue in the North and a constitutional issue in the South. There was no more room for compromise. In 1859, John Brown and a group of abolitionists organized a raid on Harpers Ferry, Virginia, a federal arsenal. Brown hoped that slaves would come to the arsenal and he would then lead a massive slave uprising. Here's a picture of John Brown, and here is an artist's rendition of the attacking of the arsenal. An arsenal was a place where the United States military stored weapons, and what Brown was trying to do was steal these weapons, give them to the slaves, and then he would lead a massive slave uprising in the South. Brown was unsuccessful and captured. He was found guilty of murder and treason and sentenced to death. And if you look at this picture right here, this is a picture of John Brown's execution. Many Northerners saw Brown as a hero. Southerners felt that the North wanted to destroy slavery and the South along with it. This convinced many Southerners that war was inevitable. Now, when you look at this painting here, this was done after the start of the Civil War, and it shows the impact of John Brown. Here's John Brown right here. Shows the storm coming, which is, of course, the Civil War. Here's the South. Here's the North. And then this represents the people who are killed at the start of the Civil War. In 1860, Republican Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Southerners' reaction was strong. They felt that the country had put an abolitionist in the White House. The South felt that secession was the only option. In his first inaugural address, Lincoln stated that he would leave slavery alone, but the South felt that secession was the only option. The South felt they had the right to secede. The Declaration of Independence stated that it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish a government that denies the rights of its citizens. Lincoln, they believed, would deny them the right to own slaves. And this is a picture from the Charleston Mercury showing that the Union was dissolved because the southern states were forming their own country. By February 1861, Alabama, Florida, Texas, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi had seceded. They formed the Confederate States of America. In this area right here was the new country, the Confederate States of America. After Lincoln took the oath of office in 1861, he announced that no state can lawfully leave the Union. He declared, however, that there would be no war unless the South started it. In April of 1861, the Confederates asked for the surrender of Fort Sumter in Charleston. And here you see a picture of Fort Sumter, which is in Charleston Harbor. Major Robert Anderson of the Union refused to surrender. The Confederate troops proceeded to shell Fort Sumter. Anderson ran out of ammunition and was forced to surrender. And if you see this picture here, you see an artist's rendition of the shelling of Fort Sumter, which started the American Civil War. America's Civil War had begun. This war ended up costing over 600,000 Americans their lives and forever changed the history of the United States.